My name is Michael Gunton. I'm Senior Archivist with the Library and Archive Service. And I've been involved with the collection since involved with the collection since the beginning, since 2004. I'll be talking about why Portsmouth, why is the collection here, the collection and the collections. There is a distinction. And taking in Richard Lancelyn Green's collection, the process of it. I'll give an overview of that collection, and I'll say a little bit about making the Conan Doyle collection accessible. Why Portsmouth? So Conan Doyle lived here, first thing to say, between 1882 and 1890. And he wrote the first two Sherlock Holmes novels here, as well as other things. He liked the place. Here he is standing outside Bush Villas, where he lived. We don't know who the women in the windows are, but it's tempting to speculate. Portsmouth, for centuries, has been known for its for being a strong naval and military centre, a historic dockyard and so on. But by the second half of the 19th century, it had a thriving cultural scene too. Writers, artists, others, and Conan Doyle easily made friends and connections here, connections which lasted his whole life. It was formative, his time here. The collection. So first of all, the Arthur Conan Doyle collection, Lancelyn Green Bequest, to give it its full name. But also the Adventure of the Creeping Man manuscript, which we received from the estate of Dame Jean Conan Doyle, and the Idalji papers. These appear to be the police files relating to the George Idalji case, at least from the point that Conan Doyle got interested. There's correspondence between Conan Doyle and Anson, as well as other material. But so that we talk about the collection as a whole, embracing a number of collections, but the first ACD1 is by far and away the biggest collection in terms of bulk, running to 800 boxes of archives, 300 boxes of magazines, as well as the books and the objects. Whereas the Adventure of the Creeping Man fits comfortably in a single archive box. The Idalji papers, 3 archive boxes. So the Lancelyn Green material it dwarfs the other collections. Here's Richard Lancelyn Green. Here he is standing dressed as Dr. Stamford, ready for one of the periodic pilgrimages to Switzerland, undertaken by members of the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. Richard became interested in Sherlock Holmes apparently when he was 5. He joined the Sherlock Holmes Society of London when he was 11. He was the son of Roger Lancelyn Green, who was also interested in Sherlock Holmes, Conan Doyle, and wrote a Sherlock Holmes radio play. Roger was interested in other things as well, a wide range of things. Richard had his own private income, so after he left university, he could spend his life traveling, collecting, meeting people, researching, writing, and so on. He died in 2004, shortly after which we were told that we had first refusal on his collection. The will says this is because Conan Doyle lived here, but also It records that Richard Lancelyn Green visited the Central Library and was so impressed by the helpfulness and knowledgeability of the staff. So some people have entertained angels unawares. So after that was Edinburgh and I think the British Library. There was some discussion, a couple of visits up to the Richard's house in London were made by people, and the decision was taken to accept the collection. As a result, I and others spent 2 weeks at his house in London, Monday to Friday. We stayed in a hotel. And then a week at the family home on the Wirral in December. We had authority to take anything relating to Conan Doyle and his works. None of us were particularly Sherlockians or Doyleans. So for all of us, it was something of a vertical learning curve. As we sorted through the material, it wasn't catalogued or indexed in any way. We put it into storage boxes, which the storage company, Cadogan and Tate, took away every day into storage. They'd done an assessment of how much there was, but they were surprised at a certain point. They said, me and the lads aren't going to be here the rest of the day. We realized there's more here than we anticipated, and so we're going to move everything into a larger store, so there'll be room for it. Equally, Richard's brother and sister knew there was also material, didn't know exactly how much there was. And as it kept coming out of the house, they were surprised too how much there was. Once we'd established properly how much material there was, we could prepare to accept it. And the following June 2005, the collection came to Portsmouth. There are some boxes arriving at the back of the Central Library in Portsmouth. There's a number of the Cadogan and Tate boxes being loaded into the loading bay at the back of the library. When we'd put things in the places where we had decided, at least temporarily, and I began to unload the boxes, we could begin cataloguing it. And one part of that was we started to involve volunteers. There's a volunteer working on some of the museum collection. There's some books there. There's a Russian doll, Sherlock Holmes, and there are some of the posters. Yeah, we had a lot of volunteers involved in the cataloguing collection over the years. It made a phenomenal contribution to the development of making the collection accessible. So to look at the Arthur Conan Doyle collection, Lancelyn Green Bequest, ACD1. It contains 3,000 objects, 16,000 books, and 40,000 documents, 40,000 archives, that is. The books consist of Sherlock Holmes canon in many languages, in English and in many languages. We have a copy of the Hound of the Baskervilles in Inuit, for instance. Also includes Sherlock Holmes stories written by others, and other fiction and non-fiction that Conan Doyle wrote if Richard Lancelyn Green could track it down. Yeah, so there's an immense amount. Then books about all the things that Conan Doyle was interested in, things like the development of detective fiction and science fiction, spiritualism, the Boer War, and so on. If there was an American edition, he would collect that along with the British edition. The objects, 3,000 objects, consist of items owned by Conan Doyle, such as his waistcoat, his boxing gloves, a cigar case. These things are on display in the exhibition at the museum. Then there are items used in stage, screen, radio adaptations of Sherlock Holmes stories, things like Baker Street signs. We have a couple of pipes which Jeremy Brett appears to smoke in a couple of the episodes. He can't have smoked because they're made of plastic and they would have melted. But yes, things like that. Richard Lancelyn Green advised Granada on their run of dramatizations of the Sherlock Holmes canon, which starred Jeremy Brett. Richard Lancelyn Green and Jeremy Brett were friends. And then we have, so I can show you some books. There's The Adventures of Gerard, The Lost World, in foreign languages, Adventures of Gerard. So, as well as the things owned by Conan Doyle and the things used in stage, screen and radio, television adaptations of Sherlock Holmes stories, there is the endless cavalcade of memorabilia. Things like the Snoopy lamp with Snoopy dressed as Sherlock Holmes, the Data dressed as Sherlock Holmes, who appears in 2 episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation, dressed as Sherlock Holmes. Then the board games, the Toby Jugs, the detective outfits, the games, the advertising. There's a whole wealth of material. It's an endless form. Then turning to the archives. There's something else from the memorabilia. This is a sugar cube wrapper. We don't know how Richard came upon half of the material, well, any of the material in the collection, really. Some things we know by inference, but some things just yes. So, the archives. We have Richard's working papers, right from the small notebooks of notes he made, his research notes for any number of subjects, drafts of articles that he wrote, introductions to books, new editions and so on. Lots of all of these things he wrote. He edited a volume of letters to Sherlock Holmes, for instance. Big work to do with that. Really anything that any publishing project he was involved with. We have correspondence with other Doylean Sherlockians around the world. It's really the whole process. Then we have material on Conan Doyle and his family. There's Conan Doyle paddling with one of his sons. Yes, dressed, slightly overdressed as he was. To our eyes, I always think. So we have photographs of Conan Doyle right from all through his life, from being a small child to right to the end. There are some albums, mostly from the 1920s, but some early ones. We have an album of photos of manoeuvres on Salisbury Plain at the time of the Boer War, for instance, where Conan Doyle is shown. Some original photos, more modern reprints. We also have Dennis and Adrian as 2 sons by a second marriage. We're interested in racing cars and own several, and we have pictures of racing cars and other material to do with race meets. We have correspondence, but very little about his correspondence around books and so on. Very much. There are notes in the 3 diaries we have about publication dates and so on. Dennis Conan Doyle married Nina Mudvani, who was Georgian aristocracy. It came out of, she and her brothers came out of Russia during the Civil War. And so there's material in the collection in Russian and in Georgian. There's a box of material around the Automatic Sculpture Company. There was a talk after this season on that, an Endeavour paperwork, which was alluded to in the talk. And then a number of boxes with the administration of rights to produce new editions of books, new translations of the stories, plays, films, and so on, all of that, handling the rights to do that. There's almost nothing to do with his Conan Doyle's time in Portsmouth. It's just a great shame, really. Here he is with Billy and either Dennis or Adrian, I can never tell which on board the boat. So yeah, there are formal and informal pictures in holiday snaps and so on. Pictures of him playing any number of sports, for instance. Yeah, really quite, it's really very, very varied. And pictures of his children at various ages and so on. Then there's material relating to Conan Doyle's interest in spiritualism, photos of psychic phenomena, mediums in trance, accounts of sittings, pamphlets and letters to the press, pamphlets he wrote about spiritualism, his letters to the press and replies, people replying to it. Then letters from people who had heard Conan Doyle speak, or had read a book or a booklet by him, saying often how much it had helped them and so on. There's very little about the Cottingley fairies, which Conan Doyle was interested in. We have the standard photos and so on, and some modern pamphlets about the subject of the Cottingley fairies. Here in this photos we see Arthur and his wife Jean with English delegates at the Spiritualist Congress in Liège in August 1923. The two figures at the back are statues rather than anything else. Then material to do with 300 to 400 stage, screen, radio, television dramatizations, which I mean scripts and screenplays, photographs, publicity material, programs, for over 600 productions, stage productions, that is. Many of them round the country, around the UK, provincial theatres that either Richard went to or had been sent to. And they cover from Conan Doyle's time to the time when Richard last Lingley died. Really very varied. There we have William Gillette sitting there as an iconic Sherlock Holmes figure. This material is mostly in English, though we have particularly posters and photographs to do with some foreign actors. There's some about Hans Albers, for instance, who played Sherlock Holmes for German audiences in the 30s and 40s. There's some publicity material to do with English language films that were translated then into German and Spanish and so on. It mostly covers, the dramatizations are mostly about Sherlock Holmes. There is some Brigadier Gerard material and some Lost World material. Then we have a section on the Victorian, what we call Victorian Edwardian world, a broad subject. People of Conan Doyle's time, people with a connection to Conan Doyle. Hornung, who is Doyle's brother-in-law, Paget brothers, Sidney Paget did the illustrations for Strand magazine stories. Beeton, the Beeton family, because of the Study in Scarlet being published in Beeton's Christmas Annual. Robert Louis Stevenson, Bellows Scott, and so on. whole range of people. Here we have Sidney Paget punting, wearing a deerstalker hat. We have some photos of Joseph Bell, who Conan Doyle acknowledged as one of the models of Sherlock Holmes. Then we have ephemera, that is advertising birthday cards with a Sherlockian theme, greetings cards, stamps with a Sherlockian theme, Snoopy as Sherlock Holmes on cards and in booklets. Menus and publicity for Sherlock Holmes themed cafes and restaurants, some of which are more elaborate and thought through than others, but all around the world. Advertising, as I mentioned. There's no one. At one point, Richard Lancelyn Green was trying to collect every visual reference to Sherlock Holmes, but it's impossible. Once you start, you realise how impossible it is. Then we have newspapers and newspaper cuttings. So these are original newspapers, printouts of pages from newspapers and newspaper cuttings from Conan Doyle's time until when Richard died. Conan Doyle's interventions in the press on a range of subjects, Sherlock Holmes, but a whole range of other things at various times, and replies to those. But it also includes things like reviews of new editions of books that Richard was interested in, and so on, either to do with Conan Doyle or other authors that he was interested in. Then we have material on exhibitions, publicity, and some photos, exhibitions all around the world, and a good number of photos and other items relating to the recreation of 2-to-1 with the Baker Street, which featured in the Festival of Britain in 1951. There's the room from one angle. There's the room from the other angle. We have material to do with groups and societies, again, around the world. Lots of material on the Sherlock Holmes Society of London and Baker Street Irregulars, which Richard was a member of both of those, and very active in the Sherlock Holmes Society of London, for instance. But also material relating to 143 other Sherlockian Doylean societies around the world, mostly English language, though there are a few that aren't. Then we have catalogues from bookshops and auction houses. Some big auction houses like Christie's, other specialist sales, specialist bookshops, and so on. Again, very, very diverse, and catalogues that Richard was received and went through diligently. So you can see that the collection is very wide-ranging. It runs everything from Conan Doyle and his family, but also the wider phenomenon, particularly the Sherlock Holmes phenomenon, and the community of Sherlockians around the world. Everything from a letter in Conan Doyle's hands to a Snoopy outfit. All part of this wonderful Sherlockian world that we're part of.